Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. Today, I'm joined by Khaim Morton, the Deputy Treasurer of California and the former principal and founder of KRM Strategies. Khaim's career has taken him from starting out as a file clerk at Warner Brothers to navigating the fast-paced and complex world of politics to becoming a trusted public policy strategist, connector, and advocate. With nearly 2 decades of experience, including serving as Deputy Secretary for Legislation under Governor Jerry Brown, he's learned how to build relationships, bridge divides, and lead with clarity, purpose, and adaptability. Khaim, welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you very much for the invite.
Now, Khaim, you began your career as a file clerk at Warner Brothers before moving into politics, which is a very different world. Can you share how that leap happened and what drew you into public service?
Yeah. So, kind of starting out background wise, my parents had always been involved in government and public service, from the time that they were both high school teachers, high school English teachers, up through then growing up. My dad was a reporter, and he covered LA city and county politics. And so we were always, three of us kind of like around him then. And then as time kind of grew on, my mom started going back to work. Then she was helping on people's campaigns. And then next thing you know, she's like, you know, accumulating skill sets where people are like, hey, well, can we appoint you to this commission? Can we, ask you to sit, here and there? So the public service thing has been in the family, but it's, initially I thought I was going in a different direction because as you mentioned, it's like I had the initial job at Warner Brothers, and yes, that's what it sounds as file clerk. It's like you were in charge of taking this file, putting it to here, making sure it's labeled, people knew where things were, the copy machines working, all of that kind of stuff. And at the time that I had the job, was right out of college. It was one of those things where it's like I started with a temp agency and then they hired me on permanently. And I'm like, okay, this is great. And at the time I was working for their theme park division because back in days, like when you look at all the Six Flags theme parks around, you see Bugs Bunny and Superman, Warner Brothers used to own those. And they were at the same time building parks overseas, just like Disney was doing. And then what kind of like really started to spur stuff for me is then when AOL jumped in and bought Time Warner, they then got rid of all of those kind of like physical assets. So that came to a halt. I got offered a job back on the main studio lot and was there for, about a year or so, but it wasn't me. It's like, the space wasn't right. And the job itself, just kind of like morphed away from something that is initially billed to me as kind of being a springboard to kind of like do something more. It just seemed to kind of close down into kind of like, one lane, this is what you're doing. And, and mainly it's like at that point, it was like the change in leadership for me early on, going from where I was initially to like this new job that was kind of like, yeah, no, this isn't right. So when I left, and at that point, that was me leaving was hard on the family because at this point, our oldest son was 1 year old, a little over one, and we just found out number two was on the way. So you're leaving something, and you're like, when you have to leave an environment because it's not good for you. I was like, you know what, gotta go. And at that point, then it was just, the going out and hustling, and it's like I'm taking these temp jobs, doing this stuff, and then because of some of my parents' involvement in government service, and you're circulating your resume out. I get a call from a person at a government affairs firm who's like, "Hey, are you still interested in getting into politics and government?" I was like, "Yes." So then from that call, then I get a call like 5 minutes later. It's like, "Hey, all right, are you open for to sit down?" And this is like on a Monday. And then Wednesday, I'm sitting down with this guy having lunch, and you're going through the whole thing of like selling yourself because in the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, I need this job because it's like the other kid's on the way. And so he calls me Friday. He's like, okay, job is yours, start Monday. And what that then started was me working on Jim Hahn's campaign for mayor. He was mayor of Los Angeles who preceded Viragosa. And so through that campaign, I got exposed to politics in a way that now that I was working in it, instead of just kind of like, I'm the child of so and so who's kind of sitting over here on the side, but now I was actually involved. And at that point, I really got to see it's like the worth of the effort that I was putting in, being rewarded, because people then were like, here, this is yours now. Go do this, go run with this. And that then took me from, as I started to meet people and started to work on folks and just kind of like, yeah, no, I'm there. What do we need? What do we need to do? So then as he, wins and gets into office, I get a job in his constituent service department, which when you're thinking about constituent service is basically customer service for the elected official. So all of the people that see him out on the street, complain to him, send emails, letters, come into his office, they all get funneled to me. So then I moved up and then I was running the constituent service department. And so did that for a couple of years, then started doing some policy. And then at that point, then I got offered a job with Alex Padilla, who at the time was city council president in Los Angeles. And so then I made the move from kind of going downtown and working at stuff to then being one of his field deputies. And in my job as a field representative, then it's like, yes, you have your 9 to 5 and you're doing, you're following up with things, you're trying to help constituents do stuff. But then at 5 o'clock, your J is not over. Now you're going to all the community meetings, and then your weekend is going to community meetings, going to events, going to churches, going to um, neighborhood gatherings, talking with people about development issues, being their liaison between city services and or like state services, or anything else kind of coming in. And so yeah, so did that, for 3 years, about 3.5, and then he then gets elected to state senate, and then from there, asked me to go up to Sacramento, and he's like, need someone else who understands LA and understands the district. And at this point in time, this is another one of those like, family defining moments as well, because this was 06, 07. So the market in housing was still on its way up. So at this point, married, wife is not back to work yet, because it's too expensive to have her like stop, caring for the kids and go get a job. It's like those things, the math wasn't matching on that. So it's like, okay, if you can do this up until they go to school, then we can make other things happen and, really push you forward. Um, but then we made the choices like, yeah, you know what? Let's move to Sacramento. If it doesn't work, no LA, we can come back. But at that point, we're like, okay, the boys they were about almost 6 and 4. So it was easy enough to kind of like pick them up at that point. It's like, okay, well, we're moving. Because if you try and do something like that when you've got teenagers, it's like, that's going to be problematic. But that's really the start, the journey from that point for me getting to then where I started moving into other spaces here.
And in those early years in government, from legislative roles to the field work, what experience most shaped your leadership style?
I would say it was the other leaders and others, and other staffers that I was exposed to, whether they were in the office I was working for or other offices that I got to work with. Because it's like for other offices you got to work with, sometimes like, you're in a room and you can feel the energy from other people. You can see whether or not this person looks stressed out, looks kind of beat down. And then whether or not the person who's coming in, that's supposed to be their boss, their chief, their leader, is this person continuing to push them down, or are they doing something that's kind of like reassuring or helping to lift the load, somewhat. And I think additionally to seeing ways in which people did those things publicly or, in more of a private setting. Because there are times I saw when people got torn down publicly, you know, and then other times where I saw where they're just kind of like quietly just kind of like, hey, let's let's pick this up somewhere else, you know, and then they got the correction and things they needed so that they could, move forward. I think those things were really, really instructive for me. And then at the same time, um, as I started to do work and people then recognize the quality of work, folks wanting to give you more. Because one of the things that I learned early on was to, no matter how much you know, never walk into a room thinking that you know everything. Because if you knew everything, it's like you wouldn't need these other people and you could just run off and do it yourself. But you may need, you may have 95% of what you need to do the thing, but this last 5%, and if you're not open to hearing the other people's ideas and creating an environment where they can share and quickly kind of brainstorm a little bit. So, all right, well, let's play this out. How would this work? What happens here? What's the next step? Then you're not going to get that one piece that's either going to allow you to, in the case of like the legislature, amend the bill in a way that's going to pull off other opposition, bring other people on in support, or convince someone as to why they need to vote yes to support this. Because if you hear something about, oh, well, this is what this person, is really concerned about. And once you get down to their really deep concern, then it's like, okay, well, now we can talk about that. We can figure out how we either eliminate that concern or mitigate it, in some way. I think the other thing too is the attention to detail. Um, and once you have that detail, once you have your form set, once you know the things that you're going to do, or not even the things you're going to do, but how you're going to structure it to stop, don't mess with that. Just leave it alone. Because I had someone tell me it's like at one point, when you're one of the things you have to put together in the legislatures, you have to, when you're promoting a bill for other people to consider, is what they call like a fact sheet. So it's like, here's the elements, here's what it's going to do, here's the problem, here's what's going to help. The way that it was taught to me is like, when you're writing this, it's like, here are the margins, here's the font, here's what we're going to use. And people are like, look, if you're spending too much time messing around with these things, then you're not spending enough time on the detail and the content of what people actually need to understand. And then secondly, it's like when you're doing that and then communicating with people, from your idea, once you have that set, and this is one of the entertainment things that kind of like crossed over and stuck with me. It was that you need to write this stuff as if you're putting together a movie trailer. If it's great, people like, I need to go see this. I need to find out more. I need to get involved in this. But if it's bad, they're like, I'm already paying for Netflix. Got to do this and that. I'll wait.
Well, that movie trailer analogy is brilliant because you really want to understand how do I get the attention of the audience to the point where they really want to learn more? And that's
Yeah.
important for every business and organization.
Yeah, it is. It's like these are skills where, and this is some of the stuff that as I've like thought about it, going through my career, you realize like you're learning marketing, you're learning outreach skills, you're learning project management things. So, but yeah, it is real important because it's like you just need to get someone's attention for, a few minutes so then you can explain details.
And in your work, you often ask, what is it that you want?
Mhm.
What's behind the conversation and the ask? Why are those questions so important to you as a leader?
First of all, it kind of tells you where the motivation of the people that you're working with is at. Um, because you have some folks who initially come in and it's like, if you can't understand that this person is struggling, so they're putting more pressure on themselves to do a good job, or this person is really looking at this place, as a stepping stone, or this person like just wants to get the job done. It's like they don't, seem to have time for other people, other things. If you don't hit those things up front, then it doesn't allow you to put, your team in the right position to succeed. Because the person over here who feels like they understand what they're doing and run, can run, you got to give them the runway, to do it. And so you've got to then give them tailored assignments and work, in a pattern that allows them some of the freedom of movement that they need. Whereas when you're looking at the other two folks, as I mentioned, you have to figure out it's like why this person has so much pressure on their shoulders. What is it that they're stressed about? And if, because they may be bringing in something from outside work, or if it's something related to work, you want to see it's like, well, how can I remove some of that stress so that when they come into the office, it is a place where they want to be, no matter what else is kind of going on in their in their outside world, so that way it's like they are focused and they're doing the job. Because otherwise, I've seen people who have that stress on them from whatever's going on outside, or just feeling kind of like beat down within the office, and they may have a great idea, but everything they do starts to kind of like trail off because they're just afraid of poking their head up and getting whacked again. Um, and then for the last person who's seeing it as like, hey, look, I'm trying to move to a different ladder, different career. And you're like, okay, cool. You could do that. I need you to start doing these things. I need you to start checking off this stuff. Because if you're getting ready to move to this, other position, or you want to, make yourself available to go into these other spaces, you need to have these skill sets, which means I need you to do these things.
Well, we've started to see how your intentionality and your desire to really understand other people have shaped your leadership. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to explore how these traits have helped Khaim work with a wide variety of people, even the most challenging personalities. Stay with us. We'd love for you to be a part of the Expressions of Leadership community. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and I'm here with California Deputy Treasurer Khaim Morton, a leader who knows that navigating politics isn't just about policy, it's about people. Now, Khaim, you've said that bringing positive, upbeat energy and being upfront about your goals often changes how people respond to you. How do you approach those conversations so you can build rapport, even with some of the most challenging personalities?
To start, I think it's energy and openness. As corny as that can kind of sound, it's like when you come into a room and you're bringing that energy, you can start lifting like folks up because you're like, hey, what's going on? What are we doing today? How are we working on stuff? And then, secondly, it's the openness. It's listening. Um, I think you'd be surprised at times like how much room there's not made for brainstorming, for people to have an idea, talk about it with other folks, and then work through. It's like, all right, well, no, it's like, let's not say no to that. It's like, we have a whiteboard here. Let's work it out. How will this work? The other thing, going back to my previous comment, is also understanding that sometimes people aren't all moving at the same speed, and your job within leadership is to get those folks, at the same speed so that you can get to whatever your desired goal or endpoint is. And, in recognizing that they're not all going to move at the same speed, it's like sometimes, that could be because of different experiences or a lack thereof. So then my job is to help provide some of that information and context. I get a staffer who, sends me a draft. I'll take it out, mark it up. It's like whether it's digitally or with the red pen, but then I'm handing it back to them. I'm like, okay, and I tell them, the thing that was told to me, do not throw this away once you make the final version. You need to keep this original document and you need to keep the finished version so that next time you are asked to do something in this fashion, you know what the finished version should look like. So you're starting here. you have a list now of all the questions and comments that I'm going to make. So you need to keep that and move forward, and and I think doing those things and showing people that you care about not only getting the job done, but them being personally, successful in their job, because they're not a threat to me. They're not a threat to, like, my position, and you have to express that outwards to folks, is that you want to see them succeed and to figure out ways where things can be done faster, more effectively, and helping them get to their goals because I've already reached mine, or if I'm on the way to another goal, it's like they're not in the way of me doing that. And I think a lot of times you'll see people who are working under leaders where they feel like they're about to violate the third law of power, which is never outshine the king, you know. And when you've got people in that kind of situation, then they're just, I'm gonna keep my head down. Yeah, no, I could have done that. I could have done something, but if I had done that, then this person would get mad because it wasn't their idea. I'm like, no, if you come up with a good idea, that was her idea. She brought this forward. Why don't you go ahead and lead this presentation for folks? Give us a little more detail. Because at the end of the day, too, it's like I'm one person and I can't do everything. And if people don't understand that I'm making space for them as a leader within the team, then they're not going to want to do that work, whether it's for me or for the organization.
And so you spend a lot of time working with individuals and looking at how you can develop them and how
Yeah.
you can lead them. What did you learn about yourself as you were progressing from being an individual contributor to a leader who is developing others?
I'll really take this back to playing more basketball and soccer, um, because you can have great individual contributors on a team, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the team is successful. You have to figure out a way, to start bringing those other folks along. So then your individual effort is compounded because now you've got other people in place doing the best for themselves, as well. So one of the things in going from an individual contributor to more of a, group, leader was I had to make success intentional. And in doing that, it's like, okay, here's my role, here's what I can do. I've got to get other people in position, to do the best that they can do. So it's an understanding kind of like the offense and how we're moving, how we're kind of like dancing around that. If this person, their skill set and what they have to do, is much better served if they are, within 3 to 5 feet of the basket. I'm not putting them in a situation where they're, 25 feet out, because not only will they not get it done, but they'll fail. It's like they won't think well of themselves or the situation that's going on around. So it's like I've got to put them in that position. I've got to show them why as well. The other important thing is, as you do that, realizing that it's like that you can't do it alone, and that it's a little hard initially because you've developed this skill set. You've gone from good to better, to best to great, and you're trying to get, to this next level. So you develop, some perfectionist habits and tendencies, along the way to do that. But you've got to also leave room, for other people who aren't where you're at to start, getting in. So he's like, here's your space, here's what you're going to do, here's how I want it to look like. And then you can't micromanage them, into that success. You've got to allow them to say, here's the framework, here's what you do, bring it back. And then show me when it's, when you've got to this point. I think the other thing that I then learned from that as a leader is that, you have to move beyond kind of being kind of a one-dimensional player. Because I look at basketball, there are people who's like, this person's great at scoring, this person's great at defense, this person's great at rebounding. I think as a successful leader, you have to be the person that can do all of those things, but you also really have to kind of like understand how to pick your spots so that you're using your energy for the maximum possible positive impact. Because if I run at 100 miles an hour and I do everything and I get it all done, yes, will I get it all done? Yes. But will I have alienated my team and not allowed them for growth? Yes. Will I cause myself a huge amount of burnout and stress along the way? Without question. You want to do this, so that you're building something sustainable.
And then you've also emphasized not being too rigid in your leadership. Can you share a time when staying flexible helped you to reach a better outcome than you first imagined?
Part of it goes back to when I was a field deputy. And, you've got people coming to you with different concerns, different needs, different ways of communicating. And particularly, you know, people that, may have been let down, by other folks before. So as much as you come in and say, here's what we're going to do, here's the plan, it's like, you immediately, you hit that wall. No, I'm not doing this. I don't, you know, I've seen this movie before. This doesn't end well. Um, I think in those things, being less rigid is where I learned to kind of like, start transitioning myself into more of a translator. And as a translator, you have to also then see it's like, okay, well, I've walked into this room and these people are arguing and no one else can kind of figure out why they aren't on the same page. But then you walk in and realize, oh, this is why this person's speaking Spanish, this one's speaking Portuguese. They sound kind of similar to people on the outside, but you're recognizing that these are actually two different languages. You can stop back and start to then understand it's like, hey, look, okay, well, we know for you that you want these people to comply with these building standards and these permits. This person over here, it's like you're concerned that they're putting undue restrictions on you and how you can run your business, and they're going to cost you more money for something that you don't see as a problem. So then it's merging those two things so you can get to that goal. I think the most important thing you have to go into, as I've learned, is like you can go in with a goal, just don't. It's really hard to prescribe how you get there because you're really not trying to cause unintended consequences. You're on the way to accomplishing something good. You don't want to harm several other folks along the way. I'd say the other place where I really learned that is when you're working on legislation in the state capitol, because you're like, hey, look, well, we're going to do this, but then you have a group that comes out and says, well, you can't do it this way, and you're like, well, why? So, well, because if you do this, it'll put all these people out of work, and you're like, well, I didn't, I don't want to do that. you know or you're going to put a law in effect that conflicts with a a national standard. And I think the clear example I have of this is at one point I was working on a bill for radiation safety in California. um, and so I'm like, okay, well, we're going to do this because this is what we need to accomplish in California in order to protect people, save lives, what have you. And then as you start talking to manufacturers, they're like, yeah, well, we'd love to do this, but we have this national rule that we have to follow. So it's like, so if you do it this way, now you're putting us in a position where we're out of compliance with you and with the national folks. And then we have a problem in 49 other states. You're like, oh, okay. So it's going back and kind of taking those things and figuring, all right, well, I need to get here, but now I understand that I've got this obstacle here. And then seeing it as the obstacle, then you understand it's like, okay, the best pathway is not to just go straight through it. I've got to go around, or I've got to go over, or possibly I could go under. You learn not to be too rigid when you start identifying more of the playing field and more of the obstacles, or potential obstacles that might be in your way.
Well, we're going to take a brief pause. Up next, we'll dive into the importance of coaching and teamwork in Khaim's leadership. Don't go anywhere. By partnering with Expressions of Leadership, you'll reach an audience of professionals passionate about leadership and growth. For sponsorship opportunities, please contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com. This is Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and I'm here with California Deputy Treasurer Khaim Morton. And we're about to explore the leadership lessons that come from coaching, teamwork, and learning how to motivate people at every level of skill and confidence. So, you mentioned that you played sports and you also coached sports teams. You even coached your son. What's perhaps the most poignant leadership lesson that you've learned from coaching your son and the sports teams?
When I first coached him in basketball, and I'm on the sideline and I'm yelling things out, and he's just freaking out. He's just like, what do you mean? It's like, call timeout. And I'm like, hey, it's like, what's going on? He's like, well, you're yelling at me. And I'm like, okay. So then at this point, I kind of like grab him and kind of like start to kind of like spin him around in the gym. And I'm like, so what do you see here? He's like, what do you mean? I was, what do you see? He's like, well, there are a lot of people. And I'm like, well, and what are they doing? He's like, well, they're yelling and they're screaming, and they're clapping and everything. And I was like, and that makes what? He's like, well, that's a lot of noise. I'm like, okay, so then if I want you to hear me, what do I have to do? He's like, oh, you have to yell. I'm like, okay. So got that point. But then I was like, okay, so now when I'm yelling at you, am I yelling, you can't do this? Oh my God, what a mistake. Am I yelling negative things at you? It's like, no. He said, well, what am I yelling then? He's like, you're like saying, get back, get your hands up. It's like, there's a person over here, you know. I said, so what are those things, in total that when I'm yelling, what am I doing? He's like, oh, you're yelling instructions. Yeah. And he goes back in, and then, it's like after the timeout, it's like immediately yell something else. And then he turns around and it's like, now he's just listening to the message and he reacts to it. He gets a steal, goes in for the layup, gets fouled, misses it, but then he's like totally upset that now he's missed the layup. And I'm like, all right, time out again. I'm like, dude, why are you upset? He's like, well, I missed this. We're taking things one time one step at a time. First thing was I needed you to hear the instructions and understand what those were so you could execute. Now that you've done that, we'll work on the other stuff. We'll get to there. I think the important thing was that you heard the message in the manner that needed to be listened to and how I needed to deliver it given where we're at. Because it's like, we're not in this gym. It's like, no, I'm not yelling. It's like, I don't need to. You'll be able to hear me. So it's really about time and situation and, when you're delivering your message, um, and also really helping people understand context of why you're doing this. And when you understand the situation, when you understand the things that are happening around, now you understand what your options are, and in doing so, it was for him to understand, it's like that my option for communicating this information had to be done this way.
So, if you want someone to hear you, you have to think about how you communicate. How do you bring that awareness into leading teams and working with stakeholders today?
Yeah. I think the immediate way that, you bring that, you know, into leading teams and stakeholders is, starting up front and telling people like how you want them to communicate information to you. Um, and because, like jobs I've had and the jobs leading up to this now, where I've got, I'm assisting, with multiple divisions across the treasurer's office, you know, you, and for anyone who's in an executive position, it's like when you've got multiple divisions and things like you can't sit there and read like a 20, 30-page brief on everything every day. You're like, well, this is why we have an executive summary. It's like, I need the top line, I need the 2 pages, and I need these things up front, and then you can start diving into detail. Now you can start circling in. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about this section. Let's talk about the finances here. Let's talk about these things. So part of it is, them understanding how I want to be communicated with. The other part is in understanding, um, how they communicate and why they may communicate in ways, um, again, depending on like where they kind of are at. Is this person stressed about stuff and trying to make a point? Is this person trying to like see how they can advance? Is this person like, well, I just need to know what I can do and get out the way? I think the other thing that, I've really brought, in is using some of the tools like strength finders. And, for me, it's like, you know, I'm an achiever, learner, restorative, analytical, and focus. And so when I'm in my, balcony, then it's like it's quick information intake, quick decisions, and we're off and running. If I'm in the basement, then you get into that perfectionist trap of like, oh, let me look at this one more time. Maybe there's one more thing. Let me reach out to these other people. And so you've got to, figure out, for yourself when you're kind of like going into that in terms of communicating with folks, how you stay up here. And the other thing I've recognized that going back to talking about people moving at different speeds, I've also had to recognize that when I start moving at my full speed and I'm like, oh, I have the information. Yeah, we're going to do this. And we're going to run over here and we're going to do that. Sometimes you'll look, and you get a lot of blank stares back because you're like, okay. So you have to recognize that as a leader and be like, okay, so I don't think I brought everyone along with me. Here's the math. Here's what I did in order to get to here.
Well, we're going to pause the conversation for just a brief moment. And when we come back, we'll talk about perfectionism, mentoring others, and the leadership moves that build lasting loyalty. True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. And we're back on Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, here with California Deputy Treasurer Khaim Morton, a leader who balances high expectations with a genuine investment in helping others succeed. Now, Khaim, you've talked about taking the good from mentors
Mm-hmm.
and also remembering the bad so that you don't repeat it.
Yes.
Can you share a few examples of both?
Bad, has been for me when you have people who are unstructured. They call a lot of impromptu meetings. They make meetings that last way longer than they should. It's kind of like one of those memes where it's like, well, this meeting could have been an email, you know. Um, when they do that, when they clearly show that they don't value the time of their staff and of their employees, particularly when you're working in, not just a political or government environment, um, but in other, organizations, and you start kind of getting up ranks, people recognize that their jobs are not necessarily like 5 days a week or 9 to 5. There are additional hours. You got to do things, on the weekend, in order to make things happen. But when you have, and I've worked for some leaders who don't understand and don't respect those things because they're just kind of like all over the place, it drives people nuts and it drives people away because they're like, how can I be, regimented enough to get my work done? This person is just like a tornado, just kind of like roaming around. Then on the other side, I'd say some of the best, folks that I've been able to work with, current U.S. Senator Alex Padilla and, State Treasurer Ma, those have been folks who are basically like, look, we hired you because we know you know what to do. Here's what we care about. Now go out and do it. Going back to your point about not being too rigid, they're like, here are some of the constraints that we have, but other than that, you start to figure it out, and you do that, and they're giving you room to start understanding, start building other relationships, start, bringing other relationships forward, so that you can get that work done.
Now, you mentioned earlier in this interview, sometimes falling into the perfectionist trap, something I
Mm-hmm.
can certainly relate to, and I'm sure many of the listeners can as well. How do you manage that tendency so it doesn't slow you down or even slow down your team?
When you start kind of getting into more of that perfectionist, like and, somewhat imposter syndrome, like, well, why am I here? I can't do this right. This isn't going right. You have to stop and think about the fact of like, well, look, if they could have done this job without you, they wouldn't have hired you. So it's like no one else has the skill set, that you're bringing to the table. So you got to pull that layer away. Um, Secondly, then, um, as you do that, I also stop and think about, the fact, and this is like, while it's a good thought, sometimes it can lead you into a little bit of the perfectionist stuff where, you have to stop and think, it's like, well, look, the skills that I had were good enough to get me into this job, into this position, but they're not the same set of skills that I need to thrive in this position. So, that's great because it's like it keeps you in a mode of like, I need to continue to learn, I need to continue to bring things in. But where it gets you into perfectionist thing is that, well, I've got to pull in one more thing. Maybe I don't know enough, and how you then start to kind of pull back and really, continue to navigate in this environment is you have to kind of think about it in terms of like, okay, well, what is my deadline and what are people expecting of me? And then from those two things, then kind of like a tech sense, you have to figure out what your MVP is, your minimum viable product. It's like at the bare minimum, what do I need to do in order to accomplish this goal or move this forward without any bells and whistles or other stuff? So I think keeping those kind of things in mind and those kind of phrases in my head, have helped me, to stay more in my, balcony and to not overthink things as much.
And you're creating an environment where it's really safe to experiment, to explore, make mistakes, and also to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important. We hear so much of that in the private sector, particularly tech sectors, like fail fast, do these things. And we don't do that particularly in government. That's not an idea or mantra that's really been embraced because there's so much risk aversion. And you as a leader really have to create an environment for that where you can tell folks it's like, look, you know, it's okay to mess up. Let's get through these stages. Let's start figuring these things out because you want them to bring in ideas and start to work through things.
Now, you've also built loyalty
Okay.
amongst your teams that you've worked with by helping and enabling people, and especially in building their careers. Can you share a time when that investment paid off in a way that surprised or maybe even inspired you?
Yeah. And I have to say that this goes, this is kind of like a two-way thing. It's like when you're building that loyalty and that trust, and for people helping you, it is not just the people you supervise and lead, but it is also, as you're working for other leaders, because they're counting on you to do things. So in terms of like the chiefs of staffs I work with, as I work for, now Treasurer Mon, and previously working for Secretary Maribel Batcher under Governor Brown's administration, it's sometimes it pays off because as they've gone to, let's say, other organizations, they come to you for advice, or they will bring projects into you because they're like, look, I think you're the person that can get this done, because you have shown that you know you have a willingness to think creatively, you know uh, and to bring other people along, so it's part of it is those things. I think the other thing that happens and where it's initially kind of surprised me is just when you are, as a leader, but then supporting other leaders when, they openly give you credit, for things and say, no, 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 this is my guy right here, and it's empowering because now to all of those folks that heard this, then it's like, oh, well, this is a trusted person. Every time now I'm speaking to him, I know that, he's relaying this information. He is bringing back answers that are coming from the treasurer or, coming from the senator, or something, or coming from the secretary. That empowerment was huge. And it initially in my career, it's like I was not used to that. So the first time that kind of thing happens and just kind of like, wait, me? So, you know, I think the other thing is, that kind of thing is also paid off when I was out on my own and when I was running KRM strategies, because now you've built up relationships. You have now worked with so many different people and are now in different positions. As you're building your company, you find people who are going to take your phone call. You're going to find people who are willing to take a meeting with you, because you were unconditionally there for them. You help guide them through, one thing or multiple things. And, what's funny then is like, then as you're out on your own, kind of running your own firm, then to other people kind of looking to outside, they're like, well, he's just walking in places. Dude's a rainmaker. He's not, it's like, I had to spend all this time doing this and that. They're not seeing all of the work and the years that went into building that relationship, building those people up, being there for them, when they needed things. And in some cases, it was just showing that you were open and willing to listen to the advice that they had, because I've had like one particular mentor who, as I worked through the legislature, he was always just kind of like a step ahead of me. But he actually took the time when he would move to those other like stages and be like, hey, look, when you get to this level, and I know you will, you need to start thinking about these things. You need to look out for this. When this contract comes in front of you, you need to structure it like this, you know? And I don't know how many years of toil that might have like shaved off of, things for me, particularly like, as I was navigating things on my own. And I think the other thing where it was surprising to me is, again, as I was out on my own, is that you then have people who want to partner with you on projects. And, to an extent, you always think it's like, well, I'm capable, I'm worthy of doing this. But, when you go out there and you're pitching yourself to folks and you're doing these things, it's, like you're taking constant jump shots and you're just like, I just need something to go in. But when you get to someone or those someones that you have helped, like before, the fact that they're willing to, go out further for you because they're like, no, I know this person, I trust them, they've been there for me.
We're going to take one final break. And when we return, we'll talk about Khaim's vision, legacy, and wrap things up with a little wisdom and a little whimsy. Don't miss a thing. Follow Expressions of Leadership on your favorite podcast app and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and I'm joined by special guest, California Deputy Treasurer Khaim Morton. Now, Khaim, at this stage in your career, what is your vision for the future, both for yourself and also for the communities that you serve?
Vision wise, it is really building, a lasting framework, a sustainable framework, for the people that I'm working with, so that they can continue to improve, they can continue to take on tasks and projects, and push things forward, um, knowing that they've got someone who is, supporting them, and, I think at the same time also building a system that communicates effectively, um, I think is really important to me because I think, when you start getting to a point, and this kind of takes me back to um, when I was coaching, my oldest son in soccer. So first 3 games we go through, and I am, you know, between the practices and like the halftime pregame, talk to the game, like, hey, here's what you guys need to do. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what's going on. And you're going through that. We get to the third game and we have one or two good moments. We're up like, 1-0 on this team, coming out, but we're still playing a man short. Other teams got like 14 kids, so they can rotate in and out from their 11. We've only got 10. But we're up, like 1-0. And so it's like halftime. I'm bringing them in, and parents are kind of crowding around. They're like, all right, well, what's he going to say? Cause it's like to them it looks like it's like, oh, the kids might be starting to wear down, or this might not last. And as I'm starting to pull them in, before I get to say anything, they start talking to each other. They start talking about what they've seen on the field, how if this person does that, and not yelling at each other, not berating each other, but saying, hey, I've noticed like if you do this, it opens up this side of the field. And if I do this, then we can move over here and we can do this and that. And I just went like this for the entire like half, just sitting there and listening. And their other parents are like, look at me and kind of like, are you gonna, say anything? And I'm like, no. I'm like, they get it. They understand. And so then they go back out their second half and they roll off five straight goals. You know, it's wanting to build a system in terms of like when you talk about legacy, it's like, going back to communication. If folks can start to see the field and they can start to understand how they can do their part and help other people to understand, what they can do, to be their best, then I'll have built something worthy of a legacy and worthy of, of being, continued on.
And Khaim, for those who want to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, where should they go?
Oh, easy. They can look me up on LinkedIn and they'll see more in detail of like some of the, jobs, things that I've done, organizations that I am currently part of or been part of for community service or different things. But also more importantly, I think going to the treasurer's website, treasurer.ca.gov, because they can not only see what I'm doing, but just in totality, the things that I have the pleasure of being a part of with Treasurer Ma and the 17 different boards and commissions and authorities that she oversees, and I think about my part in really bringing effective services to the, taxpayers and residents in California.
And now for our wisdom and whimsy segment of our show, where we get to ask our guest one advice question and one fun question. Let's start with the advice question. For leaders listening today who want to navigate complexity and building strong relationships like you have, what's one piece of advice that you'd share?
Well, one thing I would say, and this, what I personally tell myself daily is one, it's believe the hype, and that goes back to the fact that you belong in this space, you belong here, and as I said earlier, it's like you wouldn't be in this position if other people thought that, they could do it without you. So now that you understand that and you believe in your ability, now you have to understand, you have to start pushing that out, to other people. You have to get them to then believe that you believe in them, you understand them, you're going to work to understand them, um, in order to get things done.
And now for a fun question. If you could have courtside seats to any sports event in history, what would it be? And who would you bring with you?
Oh, it's easy. I had Bulls Pistons like 1990. Um, just seeing that moment when the Bulls finally overcome the Pistons, and take that leap to really start, that era. Um, and just knowing it's like how much hard work all those folks put in because, I think about that. It's like, when you accomplish something, professionally, there's so many people that are just like, oh, we're out here for this ribbon cutting. And it's like they don't know all of the other work, all of the other people who are basically outside the frame of that photo that's taken that gets, posted up. It's like one of those things. It's like, when I used to work on stuff, boys would ask me, it's like, oh, hey, it's like, well, you have this photo up here. Well, where are you? I'm like, well, if they expanded the photo, I'd be right over here holding these notebooks, making sure everything else was, was happening. Um, so I think that because understanding is like how that moment like kicked off such an incredible run, I'd want to be there. And I'd bring my family with me, bring my wife, bring the boys, you know, um, so that they could see this and, as well.
Well, Khaim, thank you so much for this very open and thoughtful conversation and for being part of Expressions of Leadership. You've really taken us from the early days in entertainment to the heart of California's political arena, sharing not only milestones, but also the mindset and adaptability and dedication to developing others that have defined your leadership. It's really been an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And to our audience, thank you for joining us on Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, please share it with someone who might be inspired by Khaim's story. Until next time, lead with intention and let your actions tell your story. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.